Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Kara-Leah. So I'm going live every day, every work day I decided this weekend in June 1st to June 29th, new moon to new moon. So welcome back. It is Monday here. It's actually Queen's birthday weekend, so it's technically a public holiday, but I'm here. So I wanted to speak to a comment that happened on my last live video, which was, I don't mind what happens, why people misunderstand this Krishnamurti quote. And Paul came on and said, to summarize his comment, he said, sometimes it feels too overwhelming to allow all of that emotion to come out. How can we begin to allow the emotional turmoil and still keep ourselves clear and balanced? Is it just a matter of practice and learning to feel everything without reacting to it? Well, the short answer is, yeah, it is a matter of practice and learning to feel everything without reacting to it. The answer is yes. But I want to speak to that a little more specifically because I don't think that really helps you necessarily. So, the key aspect when interacting with emotion is that first, there needs to be an ability to track sensation in the body, to literally be aware of what one is feeling. So that's the very first step. For years, I didn't have feelings at all. I was completely shut off, completely suppressed. They were, of course, happening, but I wasn't aware of them happening and I wasn't feeling those feelings. And then I started yoga. And when I started physical yoga and started moving my body and was directing my attention to feel where my body was in space and doing all these postures, etc., I literally began to wake up to what I was already feeling. And that was the beginning of the process for me. So first and foremost, you need to be able to feel what's happening in the body and to acknowledge that for some people, that's really challenging. For some people, they're in like for me, I was often disassociated. So I wasn't even present in my body, right? So I went from disassociated all the time to starting to come into my body, which meant that then I started to feel all of those things which I had suppressed over time. So when it comes to being able to feel and build capacity for feeling, and I'll get to your question in a moment, Dan, is that first you got to feel. Then you need to be able to build the capacity to meet the intensity of sensation. Because what will happen is when we are feeling intense sensation, that will trigger our system to do what it's always done in order to keep us safe. So, for example, in my case, I would tend to disassociate with strong sensation. So there was patterning there, strong sensation, disassociation. So I had to train myself to stay with emotion and to feel it. I had to train myself that it was safe to feel, because when I was a child and I was feeling all of these overwhelming emotions, etc., it wasn't safe to feel. I didn't have the capacity as a child to feel. And so the mechanisms that I learned, disassociation, were very, very important survival techniques, and they are valuable and necessary at certain points in the journey. But when they get stuck on, no matter what, then they become detrimental. So I found physical yoga practice literally retrained me so that I felt safe being in my body and I was able to start to build the capacity to meet intense sensation. So this is the first step on the path. Embodiment, the ability to be in the body, to feel what's there, and to start to notice when those different mechanisms are being triggered, and to be able to call oneself back. And that's a big body of work as well. I'll get to that in a moment. The next step after embodiment is orientation to awareness, right? And so there's lots of different practices that support this orientation to awareness. Like I teach one called four-pointed awareness, which is simply bringing awareness to the breath. So awareness of the felt sensation of the breath in the body, and then awareness to the body, awareness of the body sensations, and the awareness. This is what we are. We are awareness. The awareness is containing the breath, and it is containing the body. And this is crucial, it is containing any thoughts, feelings, sensations that are arising and subsiding. Four-pointed awareness then goes on to be aware of the earth, right? And then aware of space or the sky. And then ultimately there's simultaneous awareness of all of that. And so then there's a sense of literally the world happening within the awareness that I am. And this practice over time begins to break the identification that we have with what's arising. So normally what happens is we have a thought, we're thinking the thought, we're often even unconscious that we're thinking the thought, we're completely identified with the thought, and we are believing the thought, right? That's where most people are normally. Then once there is awareness, right? What we're identified with is awareness. So the thought will arise and subside within awareness. And this ability is critical for starting to really digest and dissolve, particularly old trauma. That is the re-identification. You're shifting from identifying with the thoughts, with the emotion, with the sensation, to identifying with awareness, that which contains, permeates, and holds all of the fluctuations and the turmoil, right? Because then if you can sense that I'm this and there's a turmoil, it like that's okay, because I am stable, I am spacious, I am that. If I'm identified with the turmoil, right, that's what I become. And all of a sudden it's scary and it's freaky and it's like, whoa. And it's so like, yeah, it just, and that's where most people are with intensity of emotion, right? So embodiment first, the ability to track sensation and to be in the body, and then orientation to awareness second. Okay, you need to be embodied before you can go into orientation to awareness. Otherwise, you're quite likely to go into a disassociated version of that, etc., which is not healthy either, or a transcendent version, not healthy either. Okay, so now you've got your embodiment and you have your orientation to awareness. Now you can actually start to go into, with far more ease, being with emotional turmoil, which may be current or it may be historical that's arising now. And so, Dan, just to answer your question, or Dan Ardi, Dan R, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name fully. Kriya and shaking, yes, absolutely something that I have experienced while clearing out trauma, right, is kriya and shaking. And when I work with people, kriya doesn't happen so much, but yes, shaking often happens because the shaking is getting things out of the nervous system. So it's a nervous system release. So what happens is it's not just that we suppress our emotions, but we also, things get stuck in the nervous system, particularly. So when there's a nervous system response, we go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? Those are sort of the four major nervous system responses. And if we're going into freeze, which happens a lot, right? Particularly, like that's like the last ditch, like when we can't fight off something and we can't run away from it, the system goes into freeze. And that is often, freeze is disassociation. Oh, sorry. Flight, right? When we can't physically flee, we will go into mentally fleeing, going into disassociation. But disassociation can also have freeze associated with it as well. And what I've noticed when that happens, like, holy, like I literally can't speak and I can't move, but I'm not in my body either. Okay, so let me just come back to the topic here. I'm just going to touch base with Paul's comment. How do we allow the emotional turmoil keep ourselves, he said clear and balanced. I chose to reframe it as clear and centered. Balanced, centered, right? It's all about being centered, orientating to Sushumna, the central channel, and being that. So when the emotional turmoil is arising, if we're identified with it, and that means it will start to generate quite often stories and beliefs, and we believe the stories, we believe the beliefs, we're believing the construct of what's happening. When that is happening, you cannot digest the emotion. It will keep fueling the story and the belief, and the emotion will stay there. And every time you go to that thing, you'll feel the emotion and it's all there, right? The thing that has to happen in order for the emotion to digest is that you need to be orientated to awareness. And if story arises related to the emotion, you need to be able to acknowledge it and see it for what it is. It's just the story, or it's just the belief, and to no longer believe the belief. And when that begins to happen, then the emotion can digest. And this works for everything and anything, even the most, I've worked with people that have had some pretty horrible abuse happen to them. And when we go in and I support them to feel, because disassociation is really common with abuse, of course, and there's all kinds of things being felt in the body. There's often a lot of fear and terror, so everything gets locked in and shut down, and just like, ooh. So to go in and to have the courage to fully meet that and feel that completely, it's big work, and it's possible, right? And so what I'm doing with people, so this kind of work is challenging to do by yourself, and it's possible to do it by yourself as well, but it's challenging, depending on the level of trauma that you're digesting. And so in some ways, I highly recommend, working with good practitioners who know how to do somatic work in order to digest what is there. And at the same time, if you're serious and you're on the path and you're doing your embodiment practices and you're doing your orientation to awareness practices, and you're starting to unhook from stories and from beliefs and being able to discern what is happening in the inner landscape, then it's entirely possible to do this kind of work, right? So there is a difference right here that I want to sort of point to, because I work very much in the awakening and liberation space that includes trauma resolution. There is also people that are focused on trauma resolution that are not necessarily working with awakening and liberation, and that's not my scope of practice. My scope of practice is such awakening, liberation, which sometimes means that I'm supporting people to resolve trauma. And the critical piece here, the difference between these two things, is that in awakening and liberation work, um, it's so much around knowing yourself as awareness, right? Knowing what and who you truly are. And that makes the resolution so much easier, just so much easier, because it's not the identification piece is huge. It's just so huge. And to speak about this, go into this properly would take me days. And it is, it's the work that I do on immersions with people. So right, I'm just going to think, I'm just aware of time. I'm like, how can I be succinct, but give you valuable takeaways on this? So if you are on the path of awakening and liberation, recognize that knowing how to be with and how to digest emotional turmoil is part of the path. Okay. And it requires those skills of embodiment, orientation to awareness, acknowledging stories and beliefs when they arise, but not being sucked into them, and being able to kind of unhook from the story or unhook from the belief. Because it comes back to attachment and aversion, right? When there's attachment to a thing, you're not ready yet to digest it. So when I work with some people, we have to go through the story first. The story needs to be verbalized. People need to be heard. So if you're feeling like when you're going in that the story's quite strong still, then journal it out, speak it out to a trusted friend, get to the point where you feel like you've processed the story, right? That's a really important piece of work that has to happen for you to then start to digest the emotions. Okay, any other questions on this? I don't feel like I've been super clear, but yeah, to summarize: embodiment, orientation to awareness, acknowledge and give space to the stories and the beliefs, but ultimately unhook from them, don't believe them, and then you can start to digest the emotion, to just be with what's arising. When I had the experience of awakening slash psychosis in 2004, a big part of what was happening in that instance was that huge amounts of emotion was starting to come through my system, and my system wasn't able to hold it, and so went into its usual ways of managing, controlling, manipulating emotion. So I went into disassociation and I went into fantasy. I went into story, literally generating stories to attempt to take me away from the emotion, and those stories were so removed from reality that it looked like I was in, psychosis to a degree. And so this has very much been the body of work for me, is been to train my system to feel safe, to feel intense emotion, right? That's been it. So I've deep dived into this over the last, it's been 18 years of work for myself and then with other people to do this body of work. Okay. Feel free to drop any questions down below. I may answer them in the next live. Paul, thank you so much for your question on Friday. That really helps to clarify. I'm just orientating now even more deeply to awareness. Just that awareness of breath, felt sense of breath. Awareness of the body, felt sense of body. Awareness of the ground, the earth. And awareness of the sky. Four-pointed awareness, and then simultaneously awareness of breath, body, earth, and sky. Within that container, intensity can arise, be seen, be loved, be devoured, digested, and dissolved. Blessings to you all.